Those shares were down 7%, and it's really because of those comments that Apple's Eddy Cue made that searches in their browser fell for the first time in April. It is a significant moment in the whole anthology of where AI and search is going. Jim, you own the stock, Alphabet. Now, Apple has implications here, too. And that stock is lower, and we can get to that in a minute. But this seems to be focused solely or primarily, probably better said, on Alphabet, a stock that you own. What do you think?
You know, it's obviously very new news, so I want to be careful about knee-jerking one way or the other. My inclination is to hold through this, particularly after the damage that's gone on in the last couple of hours. What I will note is that this drop, and you mentioned it doesn't happen that often, but it has happened before, and I'm thinking, Scott, to 2 years ago, roughly 2 years ago, when there was a problem with Gemini, the search engine. Do you remember this? They misidentified in some trial run, they misidentified a celestial object. Stock got absolutely clobbered, and it was the death knell supposedly for Google and its AI search, et cetera, et cetera. We've been talking ever since then about competitive threats, which so far have not impacted the financials of Google. Maybe someday they will. I want to go back to where I started. I'm not going to knee-jerk positive. I'm not going to knee-jerk negative. The stock is obviously down quite a bit. The valuation was cheap to begin with. My inclination right now is to stick with the shares, but obviously I want to parse this a little bit more.
You're really speaking to what I think is a bit of a different incident, one that caused or needed a tweak, perhaps, versus one that brings up the existential threat and crisis around Alphabet. They're two different stories altogether. This is the big worry from day one, is it not?
It is, but I just, with what you said, when that happened, and it actually happened another time as well with, I forget, it was Gemini or Bard or whatever. When that happened, it was absolutely categorized as an existential threat, that Google was going to lose its search business when it happened. Absolutely, stock was down to something in the mid-90s, had big drops when it happened, and you know, we see where it is today, even after the drop that we're seeing today in the 150s. All I'm saying, again, not knee-jerking one way or the other, just saying this has happened before in the last couple of years.
I have a different perspective. I'm sorry.
You sold it recently in the rebalance.
Yeah, the strategy sold out of it. Okay, it looks really good today, but I think this is a big deal. This is the cash cow. This is their primary business. This is how they're generating their cash. This is the primary business they're in. And the concern over the last several years has been, number one, they're not moving fast enough to fend off the competition. And now here we are where there's actual evidence being suggested in this testimony today that whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Grok, whether it's Perplexity, that there actually is a capture of market share. And that is a really big deal fundamentally.
So, Josh, you recently sold it April 15th. You got out of Alphabet. The significance of this moment in the big story here is what in your mind?
It's extremely significant. Joe is right. I think Jim will eventually come around to this point of view. It's not that Google now disappears. Google has a steady business that will consistently be a good business. It's that the duopoly that we've become accustomed to over the last 10 years of Meta and Google being, 70, 80% of online ads, that is now what's in question. And to act like this isn't a watershed moment, I think, is to ignore the how powerful Google has been since even before it came public. So and you could play back my comments from the last 2 weeks. I've been saying this. For the first time, Google finds itself competing in core search. It never had to compete before. It came public in 2004 after the first wave of search engines all disappeared, and it was effectively Yahoo and MSN left on the board. And so Google came public 21 years ago. They had dominant market share, and they never lost it. We've never seen Google really fight for, they've been fighting on other battlefields like cloud. They've been fighting on workplace productivity with the G Suite. So it's not that they can't compete. They never had. This was in the bag. basically, Google could go into any business that they wanted to go into because they had a money printing machine in the basement, and it was never in question. And now what we're seeing is the Gen Zs are going to ChatGPT first. They don't want a list of blue links, which is basically a treasure hunt. Here, go find the answer. They just want the answer. And it's not that Gemini is not delivering that on the top of their search query results. It's that Gemini's not doing that by themselves. There are other competitors that have gained a meaningful amount of mind share, market share, search share, inquiry share, however you want to phrase it. And it's the first time that we've ever had to worry about the money printing machine in Google's basement being 95% market share. So they don't compete on traditional search. This is important. There's a company called DuckDuckGo, and then there's Microsoft's Bing. Those are not the competitors. The true competitors are these standalone AI services, and they are growing increasingly complex, and their results are getting better, and they're easier for people to use, and the younger generation are defaulting to going directly there. So that's what we're talking about here. It reminds me of PayPal, but on a much bigger scale. Like, PayPal's fine. The service works. People still use it. It's still built into millions of websites. It's not going away. But it's a stock that sells at 12 times earnings ever since Apple Pay and Shop Pay and Square and all of these other services came along that compete with it. There was a time when PayPal had dominant market share as the shopping cart payment solution for every e-commerce site, and that time has now passed. I think the way that you want to think about Google, value tech, Jim and I had this debate last week on the air, that's the way that we need to start thinking about it. And it's not the end of the world, but it's a very different dynamic.
Let's bring in Steve Kovach, who covers all of this, certainly follows everything big in tech. Existential worst fears, are those too strong of comments when thinking about this issue, Steve?
Not at all, and I hate to pile on Farmer Jim over there, but I do agree with Josh and Joe on this. And look where we're getting this testimony from. It's coming from Eddy Cue, in charge of services at Apple. Outside of Google, no one has a better insight into how Google searches are performing up or down, week by week, month by month, quarter over quarter than this man. He sees how people are typing into the Safari browser on their iPhones, how often that's happening. And he said it dropped in April. And he specifically said a lot of that is due to artificial intelligence, that artificial intelligence search engines, like ones they're considering integrating into iOS, he testified, Perplexity, Anthropic, ChatGPT, all of those that we talk about so often are eating into this share. And now we're seeing at least a little bit of evidence from someone outside of Apple who does have great, outside of Google rather, who does have great visibility into the search ecosystem say this. And by the way, Scott, this is not just an Alphabet problem. This is also an Apple problem, because the reason why Eddy Cue is there testifying on this is because one of the remedies under consideration in this antitrust trial that Google lost to the Department of Justice is getting rid of this agreement the two companies have, where every time they have this revenue share of searches on the default search engine within Safari. So every time you and I go into Safari, type in a query, there's a revenue share going on between Apple and Google, and Apple basically gets free money from Alphabet for this. Eddy Cue testified in this trial earlier that it's up to $20 billion a year. That would be a fifth of services revenue. And services is becoming a worry point here now for Apple, because they did not give guidance for the current June quarter, which they have been. It's been growing by double-digit percentage points. It's picking up a lot of the slack from these sluggish iPhone sales, and so much of that is attributable to this agreement that might get blown up by the government from Google. So that is another thing that we have to look at here is Apple potentially partnering with one of these other up-and-coming AI search engines in order to take over this Google relationship, or at least provide another or better or different option than what they're getting right now through Google. To Josh's point,
it's $50 billion.
Go ahead, Josh.
It's $50 billion, too.
Yeah.
The money Google has paid Apple all these years to be the default search engine on iOS, it's so much money. We throw around billions like it doesn't matter anymore. It's so much revenue. and the judge says it's non-competitive. If this is the remedy, it's a huge story for both Apple and for Google, and it's the end of an era.